Okay, so we've looked at moral realism, intuition and moral naturalism. So what we need to do now is look at some issues of moral realism. Now, I'm not going to lie, okay? I didn't come up with that. I've stolen it from something else. So there are five main issues that we're going to look at. First of all, it's David Hume's fork and AJ's verification principle, which follows on from David Hume's fork. Now, I'm hoping you're going to remember about David Hume's fork from when we looked at epistemology and his matter of facts, a matter of ideas. I say Ayer was heavily influenced by Hume. Now, A.J. Ayer is a really key guy when it comes to metaethics. He's an emotivist, and we'll explain why later on. So we'll take a detour and remind ourselves of Hume's view. Now, for David Hume, he taught this Hume's fork, a two-pronged fork in which the two prongs are rationalism and empiricism. Never touch or fork in the road that never crosses. And now, if you want to, you could do some research and draw a diagram to represent his concept. It's a good opportunity to go back into epistemology notes and remind yourself about David Hume's fork. But there you've got a picture there on the right there. So two kinds of knowledge, analytic or synthetic statements. Analytic are tautologies, explanation there, relation of ideas, formal abstract knowledge, maths 2 + 2 = 4. All bachelors are unmarried men. Or triangles have three sides, three angles that add up to 180. I think I've got that right. So they are relation of ideas, where the other side are empirical statements, synthetic statements, are matters of fact, and they are derived from our five senses. It's empirical knowledge. So these are impressions from our sense experience. So for today, I say, is it a sunny day today? Is it a sunny day today? I use my senses to discover is a sunny day. It's a fact, it's a sunny day. Now, sometimes people get mixed up between matters of fact and relation of ideas because I think 2 + 2 = 4 is a fact. It's just the language that he used at this time. Okay, so now we did, just to remind yourself there, Kant was inspired by David Hume on his moral thinking, and he came up with a moral statement being a synthetic a priori, but we'll leave that for another day. That's when we looked at Kantianism, just to remind you. So there's a little reminder that for Hume, this is where we gain our knowledge from, okay? These two kinds of knowledge. Analytical statements, which are tautologies, or synthetic statements, or empirical statements, we use our senses. Now, that's really important. We start applying it to morality. Now, Ayer used this information from Hume, and he came up with his verification principle. Now, this is very much in response to intuitionism. Now, G.E. Moore, who's an intuitionist, taught a lot of the people who came up with the verification principle and who believed that morality was not mind-independent or objective. It was almost like they rebelled against their master, rebelled against their teacher. So now A.J. Ayer, he wrote his influential book, and the idea of the verification principle, I think in his mid-20s. Now, this is what he saw. A statement which cannot be conclusively verified is simply devoid of meaning. Now, the word here, meaning, is really important. He's not saying good, he's not saying bad, he's saying meaning. So we're talking about which statements have meaning, which statements are meaningless. So not which statements are good and which statements are bad, but meaning and meaningless. So they can only be meaningful if they can be demonstrated, and they can only be demonstrated through one of two ways: analytical propositions and synthetic propositions, which is it's the same argument that David Hume had all those years earlier. So analytical propositions, tautology is true by definition. So this circle is not a square, or B, because they're mathematical, 2 + 2 = 4. Synthetic propositions, which are true by confirmation of the senses. I can see that it's roast for lunch on a Thursday, as an example. I can see it's a sunny day. It's a matter of fact. So these are the only two ways in which a statement can become meaningful. I thought that religious claims are non-cognitive and impossible to verify, so they are meaningless. He does not say that they are just false. It is more that they cannot really tell us anything at all. Now, he says that about religious claims is the same for moral claims as well. Moral claims are also meaningless because there is nothing we can do analytically to demonstrate it is true by definition. Say, for example, it's wrong to steal. We can't say that's true by definition. And also we cannot, by using our senses, determine whether it's true. By confirmation of our senses, it's right to steal. So it is basically a meaningless statement. A moral statement is a meaningless statement. So yeah, there'll be a contradiction. We can ask, is stealing money wrong, without there being a contradiction, therefore it fails the first criteria. With the second criteria, we can ask, is it right to give money to charity? We can observe wealth being passed from one person to another, but no, in the process could we actually say whether it's right or wrong, so it's meaningless. Most statements are therefore not able to be true or false, because they do not refer to the world or an objective truth that can be verified. Therefore, moral realism is false. So, okay, remember, moral realism is an objective truth. Well, you're not referring to an objective truth because it cannot be verified. There's nothing analytical or synthetically we can do to verify that. It does not exist. So it is not moral realism, does not exist. Morality is unanalyzable because there's nothing to analyze. If it doesn't exist, it's like trying to analyze a unicorn. They do not refer to any property of the world. Moral judgments are not propositions and are not capable of being true or false. They're simply meaningless. So cognitivism, when applied to moral statements, is also false because you're not saying anything about the world. You're not making judgments about the world. You were just making, when you say murder is wrong, you were just making a meaningless statement. Just like saying God exists is meaningless, or God does not exist is meaningless. Stealing is meaningless. Murder is meaningless. They are all meaningless statements because you cannot prove, verify them analytically or synthetically. So issue 2, moral judgments are not beliefs, since beliefs cannot motivate us. So what motivates you to act morally? This is a really important question. You know, why do we behave in a certain way? Now, for Hume, rationality and beliefs don't motivate anybody to act morally. It is our emotions and feelings which motivate us to act morally, or just motivates us to act. Think about a time when you have rationally worked out the correct action, but you did not take it because emotionally you wanted to take a different course of action. You can see this in politics. What politicians do, it's not about giving you facts. We know that. It's about moving you emotionally. If they move you emotionally, then they've got you. If they have got you on an emotional level, and you engage with them on an emotional level, then most of the time you have got the person, even if the facts do not back up the emotions. Okay, so it's the emotion that is really, really key. So here we go. First of all, a moral judgment motivates us to act. If we think of something as good and we then take actions to get it, if we think of something as bad and we then act to avoid it. So yeah, it motivates us. Reason and belief by themselves cannot motivate us to act. Therefore, moral judgments are not founded on reasons or belief. So that's what his thinking, that was David Hume's thinking around moral judgments are not beliefs. Now, this is with original spellings. Long quote, I'll just read it out. Reason is the discoverer of truth or falsehood. Truth or falsehood consists in an agreement or disagreement either to the real relations of ideas or to real existence and matter of fact. That's his fork. Whatever, therefore, is not susceptible of disagreement or disagreement is incapable of being true or false and can never be an object of our reason. Now, it is evident our passions, volitions, and actions are not susceptible of any such agreement or disagreement. So what he is saying there is that our passions and emotions and volitions and actions do not meet with the relations of ideas or the matter of fact. It doesn't meet the requirements of knowledge in terms of Hume's fork. Being original facts and realities, complete in themselves and implying no reference to other passions, volitions, and actions, it is impossible. Therefore, they can be pronounced either true or false and be either contrary or comfortable to reason. Hume. So, essentially, in a roundabout way, he is saying that motivation for moral behaviour does not come from either prong of the fork. Therefore, it leaves emotions and passions to be the motivating factor. This is because our emotions and passions, they cannot be looked at in an analytical way. And they cannot be looked in by just using our senses. So therefore, in terms of knowledge of what is a matter of fact and ideas, it doesn't meet that criterion. So emotions and passions lead to be the motivating factor. It doesn't come from either prong of the fork. So our motivation doesn't really come from knowledge. Reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions and can never pretend to any other office than to serve and obey them. The opposite of what Kant would say. Now, the implications for realism are that, to remind ourselves, realists believe there is a mind-independent objective moral truth which we can discover either through naturalism and intuitionism. Now, Hume makes it clear that moral stems are not mind-independent or objective, so it's not realist. Hume's fork demonstrates that moral stems do not meet the criteria for either prong, therefore they're meaningless statements. This leads Hume to argue motivation to be moral comes from our emotions, not from reasoning what the objective moral truth is. So for those reasons, moral realism isn't going to be true. Third issue, the is-ought gap, which we've talked about before. We're not going to spend a long time doing it. In every system of morality which I've hitherto met with, the author proceeds for some time in the ordinary way of reasoning and establishes the being of a god or makes observations concerning human affairs, when of a sudden I am surprised to find that instead of is and is not, I meet with ought or an ought not. It seems altogether inconceivable how this new relation can be a deduction from others, which are entirely different from it, says Hume. So essentially what he is arguing is that when he listens to other people, other philosophers or ethicists, when they're making their, or theologians, when they're making their arguments, whatever they're arguing about, they're saying this is the way it is, this happens, it is this, it's this, and then somewhere their argument changes to therefore this is how we ought to behave, this is what we ought to be doing. And he is saying that there is no deduction following from the is to the ought. You're just making a jump from describing something to prescribing a behavior. And there's no relationship between the two. You cannot go from an is to an ought. Is a fact or is a value. And G. Moore would totally agree with him. Fourth issue, Mackey and the argument of relativity. Now, he wrote a book called Ethics Inviting Right and Wrong, which sums up his view, and he relied on two arguments, relativity and queerness. So this is building up his argument. There are variations and some radical differences between moral codes from societies. Accompanying these radical differences are disagreements between people about moral codes. I think we can all agree with that. 3, disagreements may occur between people either because A, there is an objective truth about the matter, but people's perceptions of it are distorted in various ways, for example, due to inadequate evidence. B, there is no objective truth about the matter. 4th, moral disagreements may occur between people either because there are objective moral values, but people's perception of these are distorted, in various ways, for example, due to inadequate evidence, or there are no objective moral values. There are simply reflections of different ways of living. Now you see these swap their moral values for truth in there, okay, to get the point across. But these are the two main reasons why there are going to be moral disagreements. For his conclusion, the best explanation of moral disagreement is 4b. There are no objective moral values. They are simply reflections of different ways of living. So why are there moral disagreements? 2 possible options. Remember, disagreements occur because people have different or distorted perspectives on the facts in the matter. Disagreements occur because there are no facts of the matter. Now, we assume that we are more enlightened than we were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And we assume that progression, a society progresses and we become more enlightened and we become more moral and we become more accepting. But the reality is, and this is an uncomfortable thought, that if we were born 50 or 100 years ago, then we would have the moral values of the culture of the time that we were living in. And we would have moral values which we would find abhorrent today. So, for example, probably agree that homosexuality is a sin and that the English race and culture is the height of civilization and we should force all of the races and cultures to become more English. And in fact, we will be doing the wrong thing if we didn't believe in those things. Things that maybe now most of us would find abhorrent moral behaviour, we would actually see as good moral behaviour. And this is why we've always got to be careful about judging the past. We've always got to be very, very careful. Now, what would you do if you were living? What beliefs would you have if you were living 50, 100 years ago? You would have the beliefs and the morality of 50, 100 years ago, not of today. We believe what we do today, not because we are more enlightened, but because we've simply chosen to believe in different things than they did in the past. Now, we assume, we always think that we are right. We always think that we are progressing in the right way, but we don't know. You know, there's no guarantee that we're going to continue on the trajectory that we're going. We could go back as we were 50, 100 years ago. Some people want us to go back in that direction. There is no guarantee that we are more enlightened. You can only become more enlightened if there is an object to enlighten, if there is an objective moral truth for us to discover more of. If that doesn't exist, then we are not becoming more enlightened. We're just simply choosing to believe in different things. And obviously that is going to lead down the route that basically everyone's moral opinion is just as valid and equal weighting as anybody else's. And hopefully you can begin to start to see some of the problems with that. So the best reason as to why there's more disagreement is that there are no objective moral values. Instead, moral codes are invented by societies to account for that particular way of life. So that's the argument from relativity. Now there's argument from queerness. Again, words, meanings change over time. This has nothing to do with homosexuality. It's just that weirdness, okay, strangeness. So first of all, there is a metaphysical strangeness. So if there was something that was mind-independent, objective, that we could call morality, or some of these objective moral values, then they would be of a very different substance, property from everything else in the universe that we know of. So there's a metaphysical strangeness or queerness there. There's also an epistemological strangeness. If the universe did contain objective moral values, how can we actually access it? We can't access it with our five senses. Maybe Moore's right, maybe it's intuition, but we know from intuitionism how flawed that is. So how do we actually gain knowledge of this mind independent? We'll have to gain knowledge of this in a totally different way that we gain knowledge from everything else. So it's epistemologically strange as well. So what makes the moral properties queer and metaphysically strange? Moral realist theorists have imbued moral properties with a motivation to action. It would be very strange for moral values to have this motivational property attached to it. A table doesn't have motivational property attached to it. Think of anything else that has a motivational property attached to it. There is nothing that has a motivational property attached to it. His response is there's no such property, and there's nothing in the world that motivates us, as we would expect a moral value to motivate us. It's good indication there are in fact no objective moral values. And epistemological strangeness, as I've already talked about there, about our five senses to build a picture of the world, none of these senses can actually sense morality, sense those moral values. So we'd have to have special senses. So, summary. PowerPoint, not exactly as I thought it was going to go. The verification principle, David Hume, built upon by A.J. Ayer. You've got the two moral judgments. Number two, moral judgments are not beliefs, since beliefs cannot motivate us. Three, we've got the problem with the is-ought gap, going from a fact to a value. We've got Mackey and the argument from relativity, which is a very strong argument. And you've got Mackey's argument from queerness. Okay, epistemological queerness. And for metaphysical queerness as well. Okay, so those are the two parts of the argument from queerness that Mackey had. Okay, so that's summing up really the problems of realism. Okay, the five main arguments that people say to say that moral realism and that mind independent objective morality does not exist for these reasons. Okay.